go ahead and start. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. Welcome to our webinar on Paradigm Shift, the Future of Work and Workplaces. Our workplaces have been disrupted like never before. And so what can we learn from our sudden national field experiment in working and running business remotely? How will the aftermath of the pandemic influence how and where people work and the resulting need for office space, appropriate design, new amenities, and modified works practices? Thank you for joining the George Mason School of Business today with our featured speaker, Katie Lister, one of the principals behind the Global Work from Home Experience Survey that asks many of the questions that we have today. Questions on the minds of workers, corporate executives, office building owners, property managers, and workplace designers, such as many of you in the audience today. My name is Eric Maribojic. I'm the director for the Center for Real Estate Entrepreneurship, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Brett Josephson, Director of Executive Development at the George Mason University School of Business. For those of you that don't know us, the Center for Real Estate Entrepreneurship is George Mason's platform for education and collaboration on real estate and the built environment. We are fortunate and thankful to the leading real estate companies and organizations that serve on our advisory board. Their financial support and advice allow us to present educational programs like the one we're having this afternoon. And I turn it over to my co-host, Brett.
Thanks, Eric. Do want to just say once again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Just an incredible opportunity to hear about an area of work that's being impacted and what the future of the office is. Had a coffee chat this morning with alumni of some of our executive development programs, and this was one of the major themes that came out in that discussion. So with executive development, just real quickly about us, while we are housed in the School of Business, we support the entire university's efforts. And that is to bring Mason competencies from our faculty, from our experts like Eric and others, into the Capital Region and beyond to improve and affect the worker and their ability to progress in their career and their ability to improve their trajectory and learn those skills necessary to expand their own career and their own work satisfaction. We run a number of individual programs for individual participants, as well as custom programs for a number of clients. So really excited to continue with this process and to engage in more of these types of discussions that are impacting our region and especially the workforce of today.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon. We are fortunate to be joined by Kate Lister. Kate is the president of Global Workplace Analytics, a research consulting firm, and she is a recognized thought leader and global expert on telecommuting and flexible workplace trends. She is one of the authors of the Global Work from Home Experiences Survey, which shows some interesting database insights on the future of work and workplaces. So welcome, Kate, and I now turn the screen over to you.
All righty. Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Brett. Let me just get the right screen up here. So I'm delighted to be here. As Eric said, fielded this global work from home experiment or experience survey. That's why you keep getting it wrong, because I have it wrong. At the beginning of April, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. Our partner in the survey was Dr. Anita Kamori. She and I are among the oldest names in pushing this remote work rock uphill. We've been doing it for about 15 years, and now it finally feels like it's kind of chasing us down the other side. So in terms of the sample size for the survey, we had about 2,900 respondents that we gathered over the 6-week period. And when we looked at it, we didn't intentionally match it to the populations because it was a global survey. But when we looked at it compared to Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's very close to a representative sample. We also parsed the survey by generation, by role, so are they an executive, a middle manager, and so forth, by region, and by the region. That's the other part of the region. The role, as it turned out, we thought would be significant, and it was not significant in any of the questions. So I won't be talking about that here today. I will be talking about some of the differences that we saw in generation and in, well, there were differences in geographic region, but we won't really be delving into those today. I will be sharing at the end a 65-page survey results that you'll be able to download, and I know Eric will send you all a link to that, and it has all of the demographic cuts and everything, so you're not missing anything. I want to thank the organizations that helped us get those 2,800 responses. The way we went about it was we started with a group called Workplace Evolutionaries. It's a community of practice within the International Facilities Management Association, and they really went to bat and brought in a number of other groups, including RICS and CABA. Cornet also participated. The Workplace Evolutionaries hubs around the world participated. And then the rest came from social media. So it was about half and half social media and the presence that some of these organizations offered to us. So before we talk about the results of the survey, I want to kind of frame this around, where we were, where we are, and where we're going. So some history about the Who's. Before COVID, we had done a analysis of the Bureau of Labor Statistics data about 3-4 years ago, and used a process that some PhDs used. I think it was in 2004. To determine what was the percentage of compatible jobs in the U.S. They, at the time, said they excluded managers altogether because they said in their report, managers will never be able to work remotely. They excluded salespeople. So, we went through their process, but we kind of brought it up to date with what we know and what was already happening in the world of remote work. And what we came up with is that about 56% of jobs are compatible with at least some level of remote work. We know from a number of surveys over the years that something north of 80% of people say they would like to do it at least some of the time. Again, this is all pre-COVID. We know from Gallup data that 43% say they have done it or work from home some of the time. Now that may include the self-employed, and it may include people working overtime. But it does give you an idea of, do they have the potential to work from home? And then in terms of American Community Survey, we've been following that for the last 10 plus years to track the growth. Now, the question they ask is, during the survey week, what was your primary means of transportation to work? And so it could have been drove alone, took public transit, whatever. But one of the answers was, I worked from home. So all we know from that data is that the 3.6% of people who said they worked at home did it half-time or more. And unfortunately, that's really the only really robust data we have. So you've probably seen in the headlines that 70% of employers say they offer remote work. But it sort of doesn't jive with that 3.6% of people that do. I mean, if 80% want to and only less than 4% do, why aren't more people doing it? And the reconciliation lies in Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which uses a more strict criteria than the Society for Human Resource Management. They ask, do you offer remote work to all or most of your employees? And that's what gets us down to a number of 7%. So only 7% of companies offer it to all or most of their employees. We know from work that we've done in the past that the people that do it tend to be older, more senior, more educated, higher income, more trusted in the organization. And so I've kind of deemed that the 7% privilege. And then boom, COVID comes. And that number had been growing at about 10% a year. It accelerated over the last few years to maybe 15, 18%. But then, we're suddenly thrown into this, and something that we would typically spend 6 months to a year, maybe even more with a global company, preparing them for, companies had to do overnight. So where we are today, now we'll talk a bit about the survey. What we wanted to know from the survey is, were people successful working from home? Did they feel that they were productive? It sure would have been nice to do a survey 4 weeks before this all happened, but we didn't have that foresight. We wanted to know how ready people were and whether there was a difference between the people that had been trained in it or the people had done it before and their success rate or their feelings of success. And we wanted to know how many people wanted to do it in the future. I mean, that was kind of the big question. What is this going to look like in the future? What is this going to mean to commercial real estate and how we work in downtown cities and, all kinds of things. So the first question we asked was, how often did you work from home before, and how often are you doing it now? And we found that 31% of people said that they had worked from home at some frequency, and you can see the frequencies there. And 88% were doing it now during COVID, and the large majority of them, 77%, were doing it 5 days a week. So no real big surprises there. Overall, 68% said they were feeling very successful working from home. And, this surprised us because when we first, when this all happened, we figured it's going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to go work from home and it's going to be a horrible experience and nobody's ever going to want to do it again, or it's going to go on longer and we're going to get used to it and then more people are going to want to do it. So the 68% being successful, we were surprised at. We thought that was a pretty large number. For particularly given that, and I didn't point this out in the earlier slide, that delta between who was doing it before and who was doing it now was 57% of people. So 57% of the people working from home had never done it before or hadn't done it on a regular basis, 1 day a week or more. 77% in this survey said that they were fully productive working from home. Again, kind of a surprise. If we break that down a little bit, interestingly, they weren't any less unhappy with equipment and technology at home versus in the office. The left-hand side of the chart here, sort of like damned by faint praise. Oh, nothing broke. But on the right side, there was a very clear distinction between the number of minutes per day people felt that they were interrupted or distracted to the distractions at home. Now, this surprised us too, given the cacophony of everything that's going on at home right now with kids at home and, sharing bandwidth and working at the dining room table and all of that. So we were, this is a number I might expect to see in normal times, but we were pretty surprised to see it now. Now, of course, employees say one thing and managers always say another, and employees always think it's going better than the managers think. But in this case, they were practically matched. They were equally satisfied, home versus office, of employees and employers. But their level of satisfaction was different by different activities and also different by age. So there wasn't a huge significance in difference in terms of the size of companies. It did skew to the largest companies that were feeling most successful. And we figure that's because they're better equipped. They're probably used to dealing with global clients and global colleagues. And so they were more versed in the kinds of technologies that they needed to work remotely. They probably had all of their software and their files in the cloud. So that's what we think accounts for that. On the age side, we found that boomers and Gen X felt they were most successful, and Gen Z felt the least successful. So some of the things that we assumed out of this, because we didn't really have the data, was, maybe they don't have the appropriate space. They're probably living in an apartment, maybe sharing a place with someone. And it turns out that having an appropriate space is a significant factor in success. We also saw from some of the answers to some of the other questions that there seems to be a missing piece of mentorship, being around their colleagues, seeing what experienced employees, colleagues do. Sort of that subtle grooming that takes place just having them around. I was talking to a New York Times reporter, and she told me that she learned to interview by sitting in the reporter pool, because she would hear what somebody next to her was saying. And so, there's a lot of those subtleties going on that, I don't think that we have great solutions for yet, but we are working on it. We found that employees were more satisfied with their performance, again, more in terms of distractions at home, but also in terms of thinking in creative ways. So the blue bar shows you that 80% said that they were successful thinking in creative ways or innovating, and 63% felt that in the office. This is one of those things that you would have often heard companies saying, yeah, we're afraid, we're not going to have great innovation. That's why we need everybody in the same room. And as it turns out, the science behind the creativity and innovation process is two-part. Part of it is the creativity, and creativity tends to happen when you're alone, in the shower, driving to the office. But ideas are best vetted when you're in groups. So, this kind of, I think, ratified that it does take both. In terms of collaborating with others, there was a clear preference for people doing it, collaborating in the office, the green bar, than at home. And that piece that I talked about, that mentoring or managing other people, they were much happier at the office. Now, they were happier at the office, but earlier I showed you they felt just as productive at home. So it's more about, it's not that I can't get it done, it's that I like it better when I'm at the office. We wanted to see, what some of the resources, did people bring home their dual monitors? I know early on I told companies that were calling, send them home with their monitors, send them home with their chair. One workers' comp claim because of a back problem could offset the entire staff's purchase. There was a purchase of chairs for the entire staff. In terms of dual screens or ultra-wide monitors, I think it's false economy to not equip people with the things that they need to be successful. Traditionally, companies, only about 25% of companies pay for any kind of home office equipment. But I've seen that changing. It's different when they chose to work from home, and now they have to. So I think that we're seeing a little bit of a different attitude toward that is changing by the week. But people lose 10 minutes a day, we've calculated in the past. It's the equivalent of their entire annual office expense. So, having a dual screen, ultra-wide monitor, research shows can increase your productivity somewhere between 25 and 50%. I happen to have 3. I'm a screen hog. And when I'm working on a laptop, I'm just not as successful. Obviously, they didn't bring home their sit-to-stand desks. So we used some predictive analytics to say, okay, how do we, what are the things, if we're going to concentrate on just a few things, what are the things that were really the significant drivers of success? And it turns out that the things that are listed here were actually significant drivers. So self-discipline, no surprise there. Having a high-quality remote collaboration, and that was trying in the first several weeks, but I think people caught up with that. Your own well-being, are you getting the sleep? Are you getting the exercise? Certainly stress has been high during this time. Not surprisingly, have you worked at home before? How many years have you been working from home was a strong correlate. Career opportunities. We see this in a lot of, I would say a lot of surveys that reported in the news, but we haven't really seen a lot of clear statistics about whether or not the fear of working from home, reducing your career opportunities was significant. And it turns out that, you know, it does play a significant role. Having what you need to be successful, I mean, yeah. Being isolated, being able to isolate yourself from distractions and interruptions. That dual screen did turn out to be predictive, as did the ergonomic chair. So, I mean, if companies, as they go back or now, want to think about how to optimize their programs, these are the things that that will have the biggest bang for the buck. We found, and again, not surprisingly, because this has showed up in every client survey that we've done, people give back about half of the time they would have otherwise spent commuting, working. So, you know, you pad into the kitchen, you get your coffee, you pad over to the office, and you sit down. In fact, overworking is the biggest problem that people have working from home. You know, without all the coming and going of other people, it's easy to just keep working. And it's easy for there to be misunderstandings of expectations. I mean, one of the things that we would have talked about in training companies is how to set those expectations. So, you know, if Brett emails me at 3 in the morning because he happens to be a night owl, you know, I wake up at 7 and I think, oh gosh, I'm already behind. And so there needs to be an understanding about that. But the point there was that, you know, overworking tends to be the biggest problem. We calculated, we were looking for the people, planet, and profit proposition here, and if we counted the equivalent in commute hours per year that the people working at home saved, it came out to be 75 commute hours a year, or 9 days a year, and they gave back about half of that. So that's, you know, 4.5 extra days a year of productivity that the employer is getting. I do wonder, you know, if this goes on, if this becomes forever, will that continue? And will the additional productivity continue? I think it'll continue based on reduced interruptions. I'm not so sure the extended working will continue once we've sort of absorbed this as the norm. So there were a good representation of managers in this survey. There were about 1,065. And 70% said that working from home, they felt that they got the same or better results. I mentioned that earlier. And they agreed with the perception about productivity and performance. 75% said that it was the same or better. They reported that teamwork and engagement were the areas where they were having the most problems. So over 40% of managers said that they were reporting some negative impact of working from home. In a way, that's good news, because that's the kind, it's not a structural thing. It's the kind of thing that can be improved with training. And, you know, clearly the biggest training people need is managers need to learn to manage by results. I mean, that just came up over and over and over again, and, you know, has ever since the 1970s, when Jack Millis invented the term telecommuting. In terms of employee benefits, we saw that people were saying that, you know, on balance, they felt that they had less work-life conflict, but it did introduce some elements of life-work conflict, you know, having the kids around, having the spouse around, having the dog barking in the background, but that on balance, it was worth the downsides. And so 77% were happy with the flexibility that they received. They were happy with their well-being. High percentage said they ate better, which doesn't surprise me. And almost half said that they had more time for exercise. So, I mean, those are all, I think, good, very health and well-being issues and things that will benefit the employer in the long run.
Hey, Kate,
so, go ahead.
Sorry, wanted to step in, or just not step in, sorry, to jump in with just, there are a few questions from the audience that I thought were pretty relevant to some of the points that you said. So really wanted to get your feedback on a few of your earlier slides and hear you speak to them. Real quick, was any of the data about home ownership or family situation about each of the generations that could explain their working conditions at home?
Yeah, we didn't survey that. We're getting ready to launch another survey with Owl Labs. And so I'm looking at all of the surveys that are out there and, which things haven't people asked, and that's one of them that I want to query.
And then second, did you find the satisfaction working from home by generation to be relatively counterintuitive? This participant would have guessed that millennials and Gen Z would be more comfortable with working independently and with technology, and their experience is that baby boomers are the ones who distrust employees working remotely.
Yeah, it did surprise us. But I think with the explanation of they don't have the physical environment to be successful, and they're still building their careers. It matters to them to be seen and to see other people. And so when we did, there is some analysis in the report where we looked at, okay, but what were they successful by age? And there's where we saw the skew. The baby boomers were less successful with technology, and the younger generations were more successful.
All right, one more, then I'll let you get going. And then if you do have questions, I forgot to mention this in my little intro, please feel free to use the Q&A feature of the chat. I'll be monitoring that and trying to make sure that we're going to save some time at the end for some more in-depth, but there's some that do get into kind of some more specific to a certain slide. I'll jump in and ask Kate to expand on it. So the last one that we're going to do in this stage is how significant is the quality of the connectivity in terms of speed, security, VPN, complexity of remotely logging into the company's business applications?
Yeah, I think we saw that in the predictive analytics in terms of having the resources they need. We didn't go into it specifically. We will be going into it in the next survey that we're doing, as I said, with Owl Labs. And by the way, if there's any questions that you haven't seen answered in the surveys that you've seen, anybody in the audience, let us know because we have another opportunity to get some good answers.
Right, great comment at the very end of that, right, to that, not for a question, but in terms of the timing of the sample, to suggestion of running it after the kids go back to school. And so doing some pre and post and some in between would be very interesting. Yeah, we had a little bit of that because it started on April 1, and really the respondents did skew to the early time, and we've done some polling in informal webinars where we've had a pretty good population, 1,000 or 2,000 people attending a webinar, and we'll do some polling. So we've gotten some interesting results there, and then we plan to do after we recover from this one fully, probably another one in about 6 months. We also are fielding individual surveys with companies that want to look at their own, internal metrics, which is a great idea because, you've got to fix what's broke. So with all these people, yeah, sure. With all these people, wanting to do it, this is the question that everybody's asking. And Anita and I wrote an article for the FMJ Journal to tell what we think. As it turns out, when we asked how many want to continue to work from home, 76% said they want to, at least once a week, and only 6% said they didn't want to at all. So pretty significant, in terms of that question I said at the beginning, is it's just going to, say everybody say, I never want to do that again, or is it going to go to more remote work? And I think we've seen from the headlines of companies that are deciding that, they're not going to bring people back to work, that in fact, it has gone the other way, the good way. Now, in terms of how often they want to work, and this is critical in terms to outfitting buildings, before this, the average was a half a day a week before COVID. During COVID, the average was 5 days a week. And in the future, it's 2.5 days a week in the US. Globally, it was 2 days a week. So half of the time. And that's really the sweet spot that I've sort of promoted all along. So many people want to make this conversation polar, like we're never going to see our colleagues again, or, we're going to be all in the office all the time. And the reality is it's that middle level that is the sweet spot, both for employees who think about loneliness and career implications and social time and more difficult collaboration when they're working from home. And so it gives them a mix of both. And for companies,
at that half-time, 2 to 3 day a week range, you can start to redesign your facilities to not have a 1-to-1 ratio, not have one desk to one person, and include some shared. And then you still get all the benefits of increased productivity and reduced turnover, greater attraction and retention, bigger pool of employees that you can draw from, people around the world, greater diversity, and a number of those. You'll still get those even at the halftime mark. So we also want to know, well, are you going to be willing to give up your desk for the opportunity to work from home? Polling that we've done in the past has shown that employees that the majority of employees, not the majority, that about a third of employees would take a pay cut for the opportunity to work from home. But we have found over the years in working with companies that the folks that want to work from home also want to come back to their desk. They're very proprietary about their desk. So before all of this, the majority of people, 58%, were in common shared open workplaces. And about 24% were in private offices and 13% were in high panel workstations. And what they told us was that over 60% said yes, they would give up their desk, and another 16% said they weren't sure. And even the private offices, when you add the not sure numbers, gets us over 70%. So I think this is a demonstration of just how much they want to do this. And I think it's, it shouldn't come as any surprise when you look at those numbers from the beginning of 80% of people want to, and only 4% do. So I think we're going to see a big change in that for a variety of reasons, which leads me to the future. And this was a question that, reporters all wanted an answer to, that real estate folks wanted an answer to. And we put out a projection at the beginning of the pandemic that 25 to 30% of the workforce would be working remotely 1 or more days a week by the end of 2021. And here's our justification for that. First of all, we know that employees want it, and those 57% that weren't doing it before, now also want it. So the genie's kind of out of the bottle, and it's likely not going to go back in. And the longer this continues, I think the more people will become used to it. They'll iron out some of the difficulties that they may have been having. And there's the other reality that we don't have room to bring everybody back. Most companies are talking about maybe only bringing back 25 or 30% of their workforce by the end of the year, because when you build in that 6-foot rule, although it drives me crazy, that's another topic, you're cutting down your space significantly. So for employees, it saves them 3 of their most precious commodities: time, money, and their sanity. We just working with an economic development group in Northern California that sees this as an opportunity to keep traffic off the road. So they're developing programs to help companies optimize their remote work programs and formalize their remote work programs. And so I ran the numbers on their area, which of course has horrible traffic, and showed that they would save 13 days a year, equivalent work days a year, by not commuting half of the time in the San Francisco area. So it's like 13 extra vacation days. In terms of money, we didn't have the numbers for San Francisco, and I'm sure they're higher than this, but we generally calculate something between $2,500 and $4,000 a year is what an employee who works at home half of the time saves. That's transportation cost, $4 coffee, lunch out, dry cleaning, work clothes, and there's also the opportunity, and we're hearing this more and more, for people to move out of the expensive areas if they're working remotely on a significant basis, 4 days a week or more. And then in terms of their sanity, we've just shown over and over that it reduces stress and work-life conflict. And the commute is one of the biggest reasons. The second reason that we think that number is going to grow significantly is managers now have done this. So as I said earlier, they've been the biggest holdback all along. They simply don't trust their employees to work remotely. And if you're going to do anything there at the university, teach your people to manage by results and not by butts in seats. So the majority of online shopping takes place during work hours. So just seeing the back of somebody's head does not tell you that they're working. And whether they're working remotely or whether they're working right there in front of you, butts in seats does not tell you anything. That's babysitting. And there's some technologies coming around now that will allow managers to virtually babysit that I am not particularly fond of. So the big difference between managers that support it and managers that don't are the ones that have done it. And so now we have a pool of managers who, as we saw in the survey, are pretty comfortable doing this. You know, it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I actually can see that my people are working. And so I think that's going to be make a strong difference in the continuation of remote work in the near future. And yet I just imagine those poor CEOs laying in bed at night thinking about all that empty office space. You know, now looking at toward a recession or certainly an economic downturn, you know, they are going to be looking at all of those real estate assets a lot more carefully. And they're not going to get out of leases right away. And as I said, they're going to need more space per person in the interim. But we're already talking to companies that are planning 3 and 5 years out that aren't going to need all the space that they're going to need. In the last recession, that was kind of the first thing that hit the chopping block, was sending people to work at home so that they could reduce their real estate costs. The interesting thing happens, once they do that, they find that, yeah, we have saved money in real estate, but the other benefits are the things that are worth continuing. They reduced absenteeism, increased productivity, increased resilience, ability to hire the best and the brightest from around the world, and scalability. And then the fourth thing I think that, so we calculated in the San Francisco area, the combination of these 5 factors saves a typical employer $17,000 per half-time remote worker per year. We have a calculator on our site that has 125 variables and 600 calculations that allows companies, it's free, to put in their numbers and see what their likely savings from remote work would be. And a few years back, the General Accountability Office came to us and wanted to vet the calculator because they were charged with Congress to come up with ways that the government quantify its remote work program. And ours was the only tool that they mentioned in their report and said that it was comprehensive and thoroughly researched. So that's where those numbers come from. And depending on where you are, your results may vary. But $17,000 a person, that's $170,000 a year for every 100 employees. That's a lot of money. So the fourth factor I think that is going to continue to drive this is investors, the investment community, and I think the risk management community. Early on, a survey conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers found that 60% of CFOs said that their lack of preparedness for remote work would hurt their organizational productivity. I think the other 40% were lying, quite frankly. But they know the bottom line impact was enormous, and I wouldn't be surprised if your disaster preparedness, your continuity of operations plan is going to be right there next to your numbers in your annual report every year. It's going to be that important to investors and to risk managers. And it's not a matter of, when or if there will be another man-made or global event, natural event. I said it's not a matter of when. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We know something's going to happen again. I mean, something is little as a snowstorm can shut down Washington for several days. So it doesn't have to be global. The continuity of operations element is really critical. And then I think the last factor that's going to drive this forward is sustainability. When in 3-4 weeks, we could see cleaner air and cleaner water by getting employees off the road, you just can't deny that there's a potential here for improving the environment. And that's becoming increasingly important to investors and to employees in terms of where they work. For every 100 employees that work from home half of the time, a company is saving 70 tons of greenhouse gases a year. And in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York, where they have to report their greenhouse gas reduction, this is a very easy way for them to avoid penalties. So I said our current estimate, or our estimate at the start of this, was that 25 to 30% would work from home multiple days a week. I felt kind of brave in saying that at the beginning of April. I had real logic that I used to come up with the number, but I'm starting to feel like it might be a little bit skinny, given all of the announcements that we've been hearing. So this is the link to download the report, and I know that Eric will be sending that out as well, and I would like to then send it back to you I want to answer those questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. There have been a lot.
I'll stop sharing now.
No, that's great. So there's actually been a lot that have popped up. So I want to get started first with a few kind of just get your thoughts and suggestions, kind of more than some specific elements on the report. So this one from Robert, we know internet connection is key to good working environment. So should employers be paying for employee home internet if we're going to see the shift to home office space?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to take the broadband, the need for ubiquitous broadband, a lot more seriously. I think this is going to drive that needle forward. There's a lot of things. Before COVID, there was a logic that said, we don't pay for your car to get you to work. Why should we pay for the information highway to get you to work? But again, as I said earlier, I think that was at a time when it wasn't, it was my choice. I want to work from home. So there is discussion now about paying for your laptop, paying for your dual screen furniture. I know the furniture companies are scrambling to come up with sort of a one box solution and paying for your internet. What most companies have done in the past is a $500 to $1,000 stipend that sort of got your home office started. But there's a lot of issues there. I mean, who owns the equipment? How do we get it back if we need to? These are all the kinds of things that would be in your telework policy that you would have if you had done this in a formal way. Can we wipe your personal computer? Can we wipe that remotely if you're no longer with the organization? There's a lot of privacy issues involved.
Yeah, no, good point. So you did mention that probably not immediately there'd be a drop in leases or a change in corporate real estate, but if we look out a few years, there might be. So from Herschel, what advice would you give to developers and local government officials about the impact of work from home? I think especially with
I've heard from a number of government officials that specifically are looking at keeping the commuter traffic down, keeping the traffic congestion down. And there's some arguments about whether in the long run it actually does, particularly if people won't take public transportation. Now we're going to add those cars back on the road. Eventually, if the roads are less packed, then people will start using them again and we'll get back up to where we were. I'm not sure I buy that argument, but it's one that's out there. I think that there's a lot of things that we need to do structurally to make this easy for people to do. Our tax laws, our labor laws are just completely out of date. There's a tax law that says if you work in New Jersey and your company is based in New York, you owe taxes in both states. And your employer owes taxes in both states. And your employer now has a nexus in both states. And that means they maybe owe sales tax on things that they didn't owe sales tax on before. I mean, there's just this rat's nest, and every state is different. The DOL, nobody wants their employees to work in California because our workers' comp is hugely expensive. I'm in San Diego. We, both exempt and non-exempts, are eligible for overtime. So when you log into the VPN at 7 in the morning and you don't log off till 10 at night, that creates all kinds of problems that your New York employer now has to deal with. So they're really, we've got to sort of unbundle all that and figure it out. It's even worse in Europe, where you're crossing country lines. I think the sustainability laws are going to change. I mean, even hearing the TDM, transportation demand management people, who have always kind of been like, yeah, and then there's telework. There's ride share, and there's buses, and there's public transportation, and then there's telework. Now telework is coming forefront. And one of the things that supported a lot of the studies of telework a decade ago were transportation dollars, and those dollars have gone away. I'm hoping to see them come back.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions kind of on similar themes, so I'm trying to suss them out to see what's a good ones. This is interesting, and I think, potentially, Kate, Eric, you might be able to talk about this. I know this is in my network, a big deal. The DC region having different ratio of work remote capabilities due to security clearance and government contracts, and how you do this in a SCIF environment where you're going to have, potentially security issues and clearance issues. So do you see that having? I've
been working with government agencies for years on this. I mean, the government led the charge to this in the year 2000 when they required every employee to work at home to the maximum extent possible for continuity of operations, the threat of a pandemic. And so, it's been taken not very seriously over the years, and there has been new legislation over the years. In fact, just before the COVID, I mean, the week before the shutdown, the administration was bringing back Social Security employees, bringing them back to work. The security thing, there is a fix for that. It's the kind of thing that when you roll it out in a structured way, you can handle those kinds of things. I mean, a bigger risk is having somebody have a conversation at a coffee shop and hearing somebody hearing you some confidential information behind them.
I know we have a time for a few more questions. Were there any kind of some logistics on the survey? Were there any differences across geographic regions that you looked at in the U.S.?
Yeah, there were quite a bit. In terms of success rate, Asia fell far lower than Europe, and Europe was not as successful as the U.S. And I think in Asia, the home situation is not ideal. They've got smaller homes. In fact, most of Europe has smaller homes and don't have the dedicated area. And, so I think that kind of explains that. I'm trying to think of what else we saw differences in. Success rate, having the resources was very high in Asia. So in fact, they had the tools that they need to be successful more so than Europe and the US. And maybe that has something to do with, culture. Maybe they pay for the home office technology there.
Hey, Brett.
When this is all done, we're going to give you all the data and have you suss out all those little pieces of it.
Hey, Brett, maybe we have time for one more question, Brett.
Yeah, now you put the pressure on me, Eric, of what's going to be
the ultimate question.
Yeah, right. I think the biggest one, if I try to get the themes of a bunch of different questions out there from the audience, is where do you see this being 3 to 5 years from both a commercial real estate and then a work from home? I think that's questions that kind of go through a bunch of different themes that are being asked.
Yeah, I just talked to a group of politicians last Saturday for 2.5 hours. It was just, I did kind of this presentation and then it was just Q&A. And so, they're looking at things like traffic and city centers and city businesses and what is this going to do to all of that. I hooked them up with somebody else that's going to talk to them about repurposing commercial workspace for housing to help solve the housing crisis. So I think that may, in fact, this may transform urban centers back to a place that you want to go. When we moved here to San Diego 20 years ago, we'd run downtown to, see a show or whatever. It was nothing. It took 20 minutes to get there. Now it takes anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours if you don't get stuck, if you get stuck in something. And I won't even begin to go north to Orange County or LA. I have it on my website that I charge extra if I'm required to drive that direction. So I think it's going to be a whole reshaping of social spaces, parks and recreation, suburban, urban, rural kinds of migrations. We're just going to have to redesign everything. And, you know, I think in the long run, it'll be for the better, but in the short run, it's going to be pretty confusing.
All right. Well, with that, I thank the audience for their questions. And that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank Kate for sharing your time and expertise with us this afternoon. And before we go, just 3 short announcements. As Kate mentioned, we will be sending an email to all the registrants of this webinar. We will send you a link to the video of this webinar, a link to the presentation slides, and also a link to Kate's website if you want to download the entire survey report. And 2 more announcements. Our MS in Real Estate Development program is now accepting applications for our fall 2020 class. Please go to realestate.gmu.edu. On June 10th, there'll be an online session, and you can register at business.gmu.edu/MRED info session June 10. And please join us for our next webinar on corporate tax implications of the CARES Act on May 28th. Please email execdev@gmu.edu. So we appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to your future participation at an event at the George Mason School of Business. Thanks, everybody.
Keep up your great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay.